organizaciones indígenas de la cuenca amazónica, la COICA, con el apoyo de varias organizaciones, entre las cuales está Stand.earth, la RAIS, que es una red de socioambiental, de estudios socioambientales en los 9 países amazónicos. Y hoy, aparte de otras 7 organizaciones que nos están acompañando y quienes van a replicar este webinar, entre las que están Abbas, Amazon Watch, Wild Heritage, New World, Artists for Amazonía, entre otros. Queremos darles como iniciativa la bienvenida a este webinar el día de hoy. Ustedes van a ver en su pantalla, un momentito, sí, ustedes van a poder ver en su pantalla las instrucciones para la interpretación. Cuando ustedes cuando ustedes pueden ver el panel que está debajo de esta presentación, van a encontrar este botón de interpretación. Tenemos el día de hoy interpretación para portugués, francés, inglés y español. Entonces les invitamos que mientras esperamos al resto de panelistas que se van uniendo y el resto de personas que el día de hoy se unen, ya vamos en 72 personas que están aquí, que por favor activen en caso de necesitar el botón de interpretación. Welcome to everyone that has joined us in this webinar to address how are we going to achieve 80% of protection of the Amazonia by 2025. This initiative called Amazonia for Life, 80% protection by 2025 is led by the coordinator of indigenous organizations in the Amazon Basin, COICA. And with allies, the 8 allies that have done a lot of work in the region, we count amongst them RISE, this network of research and maps that has been active for over 20 years, Abbas, Amazon Watch, the Stand.earth that is hosting this webinar today, Artists for Amazonia, New World, amongst others. So on the slide that you can see today, you will be able to see to get the instructions for turning on the interpretation function in this webinar. Underneath in your panel, you should be able to see this globe sign that says interpretation. Please feel free to add the language that suits you better for interpretation. There are 4 languages that will be interpreted today: English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. We're going to wait 1 more minute for everyone to find the best interpretation tool or language, and just going to see. Okay, cool. Okay, Sandra, if you could help people on the chat that are sending comments just to some troubleshooting, that would be great. I can repeat this I will repeat once more in English and Spanish, the welcome and the interpretation instructions. Bienvenidos a todos al webinar Cómo llegar al 80% de protección de la Amazonía 2025. Este es un webinar
2025. This is a webinar
que está de la
that is Amazonia Initiative for Life, 80% of Amazonia 2025. And this is the coalition that is led by the coordinator of COICA, in alliance with the 8 organizations with experience in protection of forests, that is Abbas, Amazon Water Stand, that is the organizations that I said, RISE, that is a network of Amazonia of socio-environmental investigation in the Cuenca Amazonica. In order to have the interpretation, please see your panel on the bottom, and you're going to see the function where you have interpretation and a globe. And then you click and you have 4 languages: English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. Essa é a última chamada.
Please welcome to the webinar on how are we going to achieve 80% protection by 2025 in the Amazonia. This is an initiative that is led by the coordinator of indigenous organizations of the Amazon Basin, COICA, in alliance with 8 different organizations that work in the region. Stand.earth, Avaz, Amazon Watch, RISE, that it's a network of research in the 9 countries of the basin, Artists for Amazonia, New World, and others. Please find here the instructions for turning on your interpretation function. Please go to the panel where you see the globe. You can put interpretation, press interpretation. Today we have interpretation in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. Okay. We will start today. Give me 1 second. Okay, so today I'll be the moderator. My name is Alicia Guzman. I'm Stand.earth's Amazon Program Senior Advisor. And we have been working for over 2 years with different organizations in Ecuador, Peru, and currently with all the Amazon leaders in the basin to raise the issues that are taking place, not just now, but long before, and that the pandemic have also exacerbated. Stand.earth, it's an environmental organization dedicated to promoting transparency at corporate and state levels to generate solutions against destructive practices of the environment. I would like to introduce our panel today. I'm very honored to have amongst our panel Dr. Carlos Nobre, who is a Brazilian Earth System scientist, co-chair of the Science Panel for the Amazon. Nobre's work mostly focused on the Amazon and its impacts on Earth system. He has also been a member of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, IPCC. He was a National Secretary for Research and Development Policies at the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation of Brazil. He's a foreign member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. I'm sorry. A member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences and the World Academy of Sciences. So Carlos today will address the Amazon tipping point and global effects. Our next speaker, 1 second, it's Gregorio Mirabal, who is the General Coordinator of the Umbrella Organizations of Indigenous Organizations of the Amazon. He is a representative for ORPIA, the Organization of the Indigenous Peoples of the Venezuelan Amazon. He's a tireless fighter for the promotion, protection, and security of indigenous peoples and territories through the defense of their ways of life, principles, and social, spiritual, and cultural values. Today, Gregorio is joining us to present the initiative Amazonia for Life, Protect 80% by 2025. I'm honored also to introduce all of you to Carmen Josie, who is an Ecuadorian scientist with a PhD in biological sciences with a specialization in vegetation ecology. Carmen is the scientific director of the Ecociencia Foundation since 2016 and executive director since March 2020. Dr. Josie also participates in the development of products of the Amazon network of geo-reference socio-environmental information RISE. and is part of the science panel for the Amazon. Ecoscience is part of the Amazonian network of RISE. And today we have Carmen Josie presenting part of the findings of this research, as well as Marlene Quintinilla. RISE is a coalition member of the initiative 80% by 2025. Carmen will be presenting us how do we reach 80% by 2025. Together with Carmen, I'm pleased to present Marlene Quintinilla, who is a forest engineer and master in water resources, currently the Director of Research and Knowledge Management at Fundación Amigos de la Naturaleza from Bolivia, with more than 15 years of work in the areas of planning, research, and sustainable use of natural resources. Her main interest is to achieve the conservation of ecosystems through the knowledge and understanding of the true value for the planet. Marlene will be presenting today the solutions path. David Kamovitz, we're welcoming David for all the work and research he has done regarding the role of indigenous peoples in global solutions. This year, FAO-FILAC published a report that robustly showed what is the role of indigenous peoples and local communities in the conservation of key ecosystems around the world. He is the manager of the Forest and Farm Facility at FAO, which provides direct financial support and technical assistance to strengthen forest and farm producer organizations representing smallholders, women's groups, local communities, and indigenous peoples. Before this, David worked at the regional FAO office, and he served at the Forest and Farm Facility as a senior advisor to the Climate and Land Use Alliance. So we're closing this incredible panel with Martin von Hindenburg. He's the president and founder of the Gaia Foundation, PhD in anthropology from the University of Paris. And Martin has spent 45 years supporting the indigenous peoples in the Colombian Amazon, obtaining and implementing the rights on self-determination, particularly land rights and local governments. So with all this, I'd like just to invite Carlos Nobre to please start the conversation in this dialogue with all of you. Thank you.
Buenos dias, good morning to all. Very pleased to be part of this very important meeting. And I will start by raising how pressing we are to save the Amazon, how close we may be or we are from a tipping point of a radical transition and losing most of the forests. While many people envision the Amazon basin as a continuous forest, it is in fact a mosaic of ecosystems. These ecosystems extend from the high Andes to the lowland, the Amazon, and house the greatest biodiversity on Earth, as we know, more than 10% of the world's described species. Largest ecosystem is the Amazon forest in the lowlands. This is a critical engine in the climate system, influencing atmospheric circulation patterns within the basin through very efficient recycling of water, very efficient recycling of nutrients, but also beyond the basin. The Amazon exports water vapor that makes for rainfall or snowfall outside of the basin. These 100 billion trees in the Amazon forest, they are very important in transpiring from a few hundred to several thousand liters a day So this recycling is very efficient. They inject the water into the atmosphere. That sustains the rainfall. So that's why the Amazon basin has a very short dry season in most of the lowlands, and supplies what we call these flying rivers that feeds moisture to rain outside of the basin. This is very important for agriculture also outside of the basin. The Amazon forest accounts for about 16% of terrestrial productivity, stores in the soil and above ground between 150 and 200 billion tons of carbon. And also still it functions as a carbon sink of something like removing something close to 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere every year. However, I want to tell you what many studies are showing, the changes that we are observing in the Amazon. And I will try to address why we are so close to this tipping point of a tremendous change and most of the Amazon forest disappearing. I will just briefly tell you what observations are showing. We are seeing extreme climate events, droughts and floods, but very severe droughts. Before we had one severe drought related to El Nino every 15, 20 years. But recently we are having two severe droughts every decade, 2005, 2010, 2015, 16, 2020. Over the last 20 years, we are seeing a reduction of rainfall in the Amazon basin. The forest is becoming much, much more vulnerable to fires. This is due to this synergistic combination of larger scale droughts, forest degradation, and also, of course, human impact, setting the fires. And also, of course, the heat waves, the global warming and the heat waves. Forests in southern Amazon are showing a very significant reduction of water recycling. The dry season, this is the most worrying, one of the most worrying observations. The dry season in southern Amazon and eastern Amazon, over 2 million square kilometers, they are 3 to 4 weeks longer now compared to the 1980s, in 40 years only. And especially over the forest areas, up to 4 weeks longer dry season. And we know the biome in equilibrium with a long dry season is the tropical savanna. It's no longer the Amazon forest. These areas, they are also during the dry season 2 to 3 degrees warmer and the 20 to 30% drier. So it's a longer and drier dry season. Overall, the forests also over the last 30 years, they are removing less carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And a recent study published a few months ago in Nature showed that in southern eastern Amazon, even the forest is becoming a carbon source. Very, very worrying observation. And also, many studies are showing that over more than half of the Amazon forest, the lowland forest, mortality rate of wet climate species, the species typical of the Amazon, species not tolerant vulnerable to fire, those species, the mortality rate is increasing. So this is really a very worrying observation, because it's showing that perhaps 1/3 of the Amazon may have exceeded the tipping point. We hope not. We hope not. So out of the 6.2 million square kilometers of original forest in the Amazon, we have about 17%, more than 1 million square kilometers already deforested, clear cut. Another 17%, 15 to 17%, is in several stages of forest degradation. So I would just conclude by saying all these elements, when we look together, we can really be very, very concerned that we are very near tipping point, or we may have exceeded tipping point in southern and eastern Amazon already. And if we really do not stop deforestation, that's why this program, this concern and commitments to zero deforestation and forest degradation by 2025, and keeping 80% of the area as a forest, mostly indigenous territories, and also regenerate. We have really to restore perhaps 700,000 square kilometers of areas deforested and degraded, to perhaps give the opportunity for the forest to pull back its efficiency in recycling water, in sinking carbon, in exporting moisture to other parts of South America. So I just want to end by saying we are really at the edge of this tipping point. We really do not have any more time to bring deforestation, forest degradation, and wildfires to zero within a few years. This is not something like climate change, when we may say we'll have to have net zero emissions by 2050. No, we have to do it within a few years. And also, if we cross the tipping point, we may lose, out of these 150 to 200 billion tons of carbon, we may lose a large portion of that, making almost impossible to keep the warming in the planet below 1.5. Because if we lose 50% of this carbon, that means over 250, 300 million tons of carbon dioxide. And to keep the limits, the global warming before 1.5 degrees, we have at most 500 billion tons of carbon dioxide to emit globally in all sectors, including fuels, fossil fuels. So therefore, I just end by saying congratulations on the initiative. This is tremendously important, and we really have to abide by this promise and the commitment of all Amazonian countries to zero deforestation, forest degradation, and wildfires within a few years. Thank you very much. Gracias. Muchas gracias.
Carlos, thank you. And I just want to wrap up, and I think that the message that Carlos has put it out there is one of emergency. Sometimes we count like the percentages where 17, 20, 18, but this is an urgent call that has to be heard, because the Amazonia, it's different from the climate change horizon. So we'd like to thank Carlos for just putting out there the science that has been developed on the tipping point. I would like to invite right now, we're going to change a little just because there's some technological problems with Gregorio Mirabal at the moment. But we'd like to invite Carmen Josie to start the presentation on how are we going to reach these 80%, to avert or stop the tipping point in the Amazonia. And what are the initial findings of a research that has started this year and follows up various years of research that RISE has been developing to understand what is the reality of the Amazonia, what are the opportunities, what's the cultural diversity and biodiversity in the region, in how much they can see it through maps will be exposed today, as also as I was saying, the initial findings of what we can see or where's the opportunity to immediately act on the 80%. Without much said, I'll leave it to Carmen Josie. Carmen.
Buenos días a todos, o buenas noches, o en fin, tardes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How are you? Thank you, Alicia. I'm going just to have a brief introduction, and then you have my companion Marlene Quintinilla that you explain the process of analysis.
Básicamente, como dijo Alicia, la idea es poder identificar
Basically, as Alicia said, we should identify where are the areas of that have a greater relevance to promote the integrality of the Amazon as a great biodiverse. And as Carlos said, what are the ways or the opportunities that are presented so that we can get to this 80% that we are looking for, which is part of the commitment that will go to the IUCN Congress. As Dr. Carlos Nobre said, it is something that is absolutely necessary to begin to curate these opportunities and transform them into action very urgently, I might say. So now I pass the word to present.
Hola, muchas gracias, Carmen, y muchas
I pass the word to Marta Quintinilla, the engineer.
Muy importante.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you for the organization of this event. For us, it is very important to present some discoveries. We think it's important to strengthen this initiative with these discoveries. Anyway, how to achieve this goal, 80% into 2025. This is the analysis of the field of protection of the Amazon so that we can get to it. Let's present some of the discoveries we worked on at Hike, and we would like to share in this important webinar. To concept this relevance, we work on the monitoring of the forest. This diversity of ecosystems with its heterogeneity has a high biodiversity, not only on the terrestrial systems, but also the aquatic ones that sustains these ecosystems that give us multiple benefits. This great biome, this basin has very unique ecosystems and representative, such as, and threats can be extinguished. These functions and the representativeness
bomba de agua.
were always connected. The Amazon works
Estos beneficios que nos comentaba Carlos.
excellent pump of water.
Bono y tantas
It produces trillions of water, and these benefits
áreas naturales.
have, for example, the caption of carbon, such as others. This was possible with the permanence of these natural areas. There is a high risk, and we have protected areas and indigenous territories. But the indigenous population is 4.5 million of 4.5% of the entire population in the Amazon. And they have to protect these immense territories to conserve the Amazon. So we have symptoms. So symptoms of change in the Amazon are very serious. We have monitored that in the last 30 years, the Amazon has been changing in a high speed, in which deforestation has 500 fields of football per day. We have the surface of Uruguay, for example, deforested. And this is something that worries us a lot. And that's why the initiative, Amazonia 80% by 2025, is very important for us to have a view of conservation. The analysis that we do, or we make, were to make these important areas key for the protection of the Amazon, because Amazonia is being fragmented and we have to conserve these, we have to restore the Amazon in these fragmentation levels, in these high points of fragmentation levels. There's this functionality of the Amazon that depends on the provision areas. The forests in these images are of a lot of service for us. There are here the regulation of the species, and the indigenous population could always take advantage of this. And we are losing this. The agricultural production, the hydro production, sorry, is very important. The floods were the ones that regulated the hydro aspect of the Amazon, and the indigenous populations could take advantage and to live with the flooding periods. And we see them as threats, but this hydro process was always very beneficial for us. And it has nurtured the Amazon for centuries. And with the climate change, these floods are being altered. The floods are fundamental for the regulation, for the climate regulation. The absorption of carbon is fundamental. The Amazon has important areas to capture carbon, and they produce 200 tons of carbon per hectare. It is a high number of reserve of carbon we have. We identified that in the Amazon, in 2,000 hectares, we have, for example, 31 different species that are being eliminated by people and threats. Our methodology for this analysis was to value regions with from low to high functionality. How are these areas? On the first map,
el monitoreo que venimos haciendo en
where
RAIS,
we have all of the forests stable. There is a high productivity of water. The blue zones are hydro ones. The river heads are the zones where we have the high production of cycles, and the heterogeneity of the maps contribute to this system. The regulation of biomass is fundamental for capturing carbon. These categories here, the green zones are relevant for the provision of elements, for water, for regulation of floods, to support biodiversity, and for the functionality of these ecosystems, and the climate regulation for absorption of carbon. These criteria allow us to identify in this map where are the zones with high functionality in a category of 3 classes. Here is a map of the Amazon, totally with high functionality. All of this region has ecological functions that are fundamental for the Amazon. The representativeness that was generated from biodiversity shows that the Amazon has a high biodiversity. And with the information of 4 invertebrate categories, we have the integration of these biodiversity. We have a high complexity area where we have high concentration of biodiversity and unique ecosystems that are endangered. The priorities that we put in this analysis go from low to high functionality. And here we can see the first map up here. These brown areas are places that have high concentration of biodiversity and high complexity. And the green ones are ecosystems with singularities and complexity. And the yellow regions are regions that are on riverheads. They all are located on the riverheads. The green zones show the most important areas in 3 levels. We can see the integration of these 3 criteria. And we have the green zones, which have the most representativeness of the Amazon. And if we put them in 3 categories, we can see how the Amazon is represented in fundamental ecosystems, which are all over the region in the north of the Amazon and on the east of the Amazon. So, integration of functionality and representativeness allow us to identify which are the key areas for conservation. So here we can see that the functionality is in green, that represents areas of higher functionality, and the representativeness zones on the lower map. Here is to conserve the Amazon. There is a great green area with high concentration of these places. Here we can see things being added up, the components being added up, and this is the priority in the Amazon, to conserve it, to connect it, and to have the functionality and the representativeness for conservation in this map. We conclude that 88% of the Amazon has a high importance in representativeness and functionality. From these 88%, 60% are highly relevant areas for conservation all of these green areas and the yellow areas, we have to conserve it as well for conservation of these ecosystems. Here we can conclude that the protection of 88% of the Amazon is actually very important, not only to conserve these areas. It is fundamental because these areas now allow us to have food security in the entire region, water security, and also climate resilience. It is about conserving these important functions for the communities and for life, and communities that are more vulnerable, and all citizens that live in the Amazon. Thank you very much. Now I pass to Carmen, my colleague. Okay, now I'll go through the second part of this analysis and the conclusions that take us to the analysis of Carmen. Let's continue to present the analysis. Once identified these highly relevant areas, we will do a superposition, a contrast in relation to the locations of indigenous territories, and therefore are on the map for this analysis. And also the protected areas. The protected areas, we are going to call them officially systems of protection of national territories. When we're talking about indigenous territories and protected areas, RAIS makes the update of the data, each with the most important information. And so we can understand perfectly that there are areas, especially indigenous territories, that are not recognized. They don't have titles, and with a great difficulty in defining itself officially about this territoriality, indigenous territoriality. But with the information we have, this is how the Amazon is shown regarding these management spaces, such as in areas protected, in protected areas or in indigenous territories. We show that these areas have important roles, which is to protect the forest and to prevent deforestation. Shown this way, we cover 47% of the Amazon basin. There, indigenous territories represent 27% and 22%, and protected areas 20%. We should amplify a superposition between protected areas and indigenous territories, which correspond to 5% of superposition. So, continuing with the analysis we're presenting, in the areas of functionality presented by Marlene, and the synthesis and the junction, the fusion of these two important elements, for example, to maintain the functionality of the Amazon and the areas that represent biodiversity, we overlapped the protected areas and the indigenous territories to see how they would react So 60% of higher priority which was identified, are distributed this way. 40% of indigenous territories, 25% areas of overlap between indigenous territories and protected areas, another 20% of protected areas. This is the form how we distribute the 60% of the Amazon, which is high functionality for its maintenance and functionality. 28% is of moderate importance, but it's also very important. However, it is distributed in 63% in indigenous territories, 20% in areas of overlap between the two, and 14% are only protected areas.
Entonces, resumiendo, de ese
So,
60% de alta
to
prioridad,
sum up,
73%
60% of highest priority, 73% are located in indigenous territories. There is 25% of this area that is overlapped with protected areas, and 20% of it is on protected areas alone. Of this percentage, these 28% that are of moderate priority, it is equally important, and 83% of it are indigenous territories with some overlapping with protected areas. 14% of these 28 are of protected areas exclusively. Next. Now we would like to speak briefly about the symptoms of change, because we have identified the areas of high relevance, but it doesn't mean that they are free of change and disturbance.
Básicamente les llamamos los síntomas, es decir, ya no estamos hablando aquí de drivers o de
And now we are talking about of these changes that are more and more year by year, with the deforestation on one side, fires, and the loss of carbon. So this analysis has in different levels.
A lo ancho de todo el territorio, y definir de esa manera nuevamente tres categorías.
And you have three categories, if I can tell. These are disturbance. Areas that have low symptoms of changes. These are the areas that are reserved, no disturbance, and you have an area that you have a low level of disturbance, where you have this change in progress, and you have areas that represent really an occupation of these areas with these changes, with all these analyses in the research. According to this, we will have 33% that corresponds to the area.
We can find that only 33% are undisturbed areas with
45%
great conditions.
correspond to areas
45% there has some level of disturbance, moderate disturbance, and 22% are areas with high disturbance, high levels of change, where we have the union of these deforestation, fire, and carbon loss events.
Siguiente. Entonces, No, perdón, Alicia,
Next.
tal vez retrocedamos.
I'm sorry, Alicia, can you go back?
El gráfico, por favor. Ok, disculpen.
The
Entonces,
graphic, please. The graph, please.
aquí tenemos las
So,
estadísticas de este
here we
análisis.
have
Entiendo que
the
podemos
statistics of this analysis.
estamos básicamente cruzando los dos
It's maybe a little hard to understand, but basically we are going through both results. One, the areas of high priority for conservation, and then we have the two other categories as we met. On the other hand, in these other colors, gray, red, and orange are the levels of disturbance where these categories are of a higher priority for conservation. And what is important is to think how to answer the question, how to take care of the 80% of the Amazon, how to preserve it. We have to focus on the gray areas and the green areas. From these places, which have the most important priorities for conservation. If we gather these green and gray areas, the undisturbed areas, and the moderate disturbance areas, we complete 76 or 78% of the Amazon. In other words, this is where we should focus. What are the opportunities that there are to get to these 80% to conserve the functionality of the Amazon and to avoid the no return point? Much of it is inside indigenous territories. When we think about the extension of the indigenous territories and we analyze it, there is a portion of it there that has a disturbance level, others with moderate disturbance, or an important area that has no great, that doesn't have great alterations or undisturbed areas, in other words. In terms of area, these indigenous territories correspond and cover a very important amount, not only of the areas with a high integrity or moderate integrity, because they were not disturbed that much, but because they are covering high relevant areas for conservation with these criteria, this functionality criteria and representativeness. So it is evident that these are very important areas to get to our goal. In the case of protected areas, if you take a look at the area which is in the axis, the smaller areas which have a very important aspect. In a high proportion of protected areas, a higher proportion of protected areas is undisturbed with few disturbances. When we add the two areas together, we can see this possibility, let's say, or the opportunity, high opportunity, to concentrate a lot of activities or alternatives that are going to be explained in a bit in the indigenous territories
de
and protected areas to get to the functionality that we want. In these management territories, they cover 77%, which is still in excellent state.
Este nivel de disturbio en que se encuentran estas áreas.
Why is it necessary to see this level of disturbance?
La viabilidad de los resultados que puede haber al hacer.
At first, it is important to see the viability.
De protección, de manejo, etcétera. Sin embargo,
when we have to make greater efforts for protection and management, and also areas that could have, at this
son
moment,
áreas donde
a high level of change, of disturbance. We cannot get rid of it. We have areas that, on one hand, we have the indigenous populations that live there and still are struggling to defend these areas that are becoming red and that have a lot of change.
Entonces, aquí todavía hay que pensar
that increases each time more and that are being devastated along the years. It's important to think about projects of restoration in these areas, how to work in these places. So just to finish, Alicia.
Creo que terminamos allí también en honor al tiempo y les agradezco.
I would ask you for us to finish because of time. I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Carmen, for the data of what is the state and what is the pathway to 80% of protection by 2025. For those that came here today, it is a notion that was the basis for the technical analysis of IUCN in Marseille, and it's going to be voted this week, not only as an approval, but also to revert the global conversation on what are the objectives. This comes from the science of what would be the pathways to get to 80%. And I'd like to thank Carmen and the HISE team for these data, and welcome Gregorio Mirabal, the General Coordinator of COICA, who leads this initiative, together with leaders of the 9 countries that configure the Council of COICA. Hi, Gregorio. So brothers and sisters, a great hug for you. Here from Martin's land, here in Europe. This is an area of a greater movement that has a great movement. If you sleep, people start signing documents, and we have to do something for them not to steal from us. So I'd like to tell you that our
tiene que ser votada. Después que sea votada ya es otro escenario, que sea aprobada. Ahorita es un número, 129. Es el primer paso. Entonces, por ejemplo, hoy es el Día Internacional, el Día Mundial del Aire Limpio. Y la mejor propuesta que hay aquí en este Congreso de la IUCN es la de nosotros, porque queremos mantener el aire limpio. Lo demás es carbón, petróleo, minería. Entonces, nadie debería estar en contra de esto. Deberían apoyar todo el mundo, pero hace falta la votación.
You should support. You should have a vote for that. So I wanted to welcome Carlos. Carmen, thank you, Carmen. And you have this international scenario. And Jose, for your commitment. And I can see Carlos very concerned, Carlos Nobre. I don't know if you're going to approve it or not. I can see Martin. I can see David Kamovet. And I am happy to see you guys here. Now, I would like to ask you, David, Martin, Carlos, that yesterday I had a conversation with the minister, and you talked with directors, many of them actually, with the Fund of Development of France, with the many non-organizational foundations of the planet, I would say. And this purpose, Amazon for Life, is the biggest of all. Any initiative, if it is small, any community, big, small, must be in of the Amazon for Life, in the Holy Cuenca, the Holy Basin, Amazon, many projects are on about Amazonia. And then we are going to have just a single ecosystem. Let's connect, let's get really together. You need the voice of the science, Carlos Nobre. You have the scientific panel. This is the way to go. Martin, that is in Apapori, with all his knowledge. Let's go for that. David from FAO, let's support, because your opinion is very important. We have said already, you cannot have a kind of a ministerial cemetery of ecological transition. No, must have the Ministry of Transformation, not only with the name. Everyone in Latin America has understood that the Ministry of Sustainable Mining, no, we do not want it at all. Amazonia for Life. That is the point. If it was for my decision making, it would be the Amazon for Life, you all, so you can talk. And there is something very important here, and I would like to have a scientific exercise with you. It's easy to understand what Carmen said. No, it's not. You understood it perfectly. But you have to have really a budget with big activities in the 90 countries, and let's build up it together. Let's get together. This is the point where you have the turning point of Amazon for Life. So you should have a good budget, because if you have $5 million, it's nothing. How can do it? No, it's another lie. It is a false expectation. But if you are together and you help really to navigate in this boat and go to the Amazonia directly, not only go to the top, going there in the office. No, let's go down to the land together. And this is what you are talking. You have to have Live Amazonia, Amazonia for Life. You have the motion 120 wants to have all these shareholders, all the stakeholders with the same rationality, one action. And you have to find these governments that want to do this transformation model in the Amazon basin. This is the way to go. Let's get started. 2025, I believe that if you have this exercise, from now on, we are going to have 30 per 30, 50. You should create a fund for that. And then you are going to debate, you're going to construct, and you're going to take actions. Because this is a crisis that have many dimensions. It's not going to be easy. Yesterday, we talked to the government of President Macron. I asked, please be the leader. Let's have France leading this. And we are talking to the president of the United States to say, you are going to lead the salvation of Amazon. This is where you have the fresh water, the air, the diversity. This is where the biodiversity is. We have the World Bank, you have IFAD, and you have really to have the support. You have to have from the bottom. You are not going to save Amazon in Europe. You have to save where you have exploration, mining, fire, deforestation without any social environmental support. You have to calm down more than 3,000 social environmental conflicts that you have in Amazon. This is my song, this is my invitation and my requirement, brothers and sisters, Carlos Nobre, Martin von Wiedebrand, David Kaimovelt. Let's get together, let's get connected, definitely, and make it to work. You have just a step to be approved. And even if you are not going to be approved, you're going to keep fighting and going ahead. There is no time to waste. Current brothers and sisters, thank you for your coming here. Thank you for your words. Excellent, Gregory. Thank you for calling to action and think about these figures and the plan that you can do and get to 80% and go ahead with the agenda today. I would like to have David come up to introduce and to present to us. What is the problem of the indigenous people within the solution in Amazonia and in a global level? Thank you, Alicia.
I'm not going to repeat what others have said. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to have the opportunity to share with you what the FAO and FILAC found in our own study of 300 different studies about the indigenous and tribal territories in the Amazon that's relevant for this discussion. As Carmen was saying, only about 27%, maybe 30, maybe a little bit more than 30, depending on how you count it, of the Amazon basin is in indigenous territories. Now that in itself is an area that's larger than France and the United Kingdom and Germany and Italy and Norway and Spain all put together, but it's not 80%. So how does this relate to a discussion of the 80%? I think Carlos already told us that the Amazon basin is an ecological whole. You can't destroy 50% of the Amazon basin and just leave the other 50% in indigenous territories and protected areas. It doesn't work like that, because you have a tipping point where if you don't preserve a critical mass sufficient of the Amazon basin, ultimately it would be difficult to preserve even an area of 50% or the area potentially of the 27% of indigenous territories. We heard from Carmen and Marlene very, very clearly that 27% or 30% of the Amazon basin that is in the indigenous territories is much better preserved than the rest of the Amazon basin, on average, certainly better preserved than the rest of the Amazon basin that's not in the protected areas. I'm not going to repeat all of the fabulous statistics that she gave you, but I will say that it's important for us to remember that that didn't just happen. It happened as a result of a combination of different factors, but two of the most important factors are that the indigenous peoples have indeed been the guardians of these forests and the managers of these forests. And the fact that these forests are so much better off is a result of all of their efforts and their culture and their production systems and consumption systems. And it's also the result of many policies. And we've seen consistently that it was a result of these indigenous peoples being guardians of the forests and of some surprisingly progressive Latin American policies towards them. The deforestation rates, the degradation rates in the indigenous territories have been much lower than in other Amazon forest areas. But unfortunately, what we didn't hear when Carmen and Marlene was talking about, but it's very important to understand, is that the trends are not working in the right direction. We can talk about how much is moderately, severely, not very well disturbed. And those numbers are right. The problem is that the disturbances, the pressures, the risks, the threats are growing very, very rapidly. And in part, they're threats from ranching and cropping and mining and logging. And in part, they're also threats from those tipping points that Carlos Nobre himself was talking about, fires and dryness, which are making the whole system more fragile. So that raises the issue, what can be done and what does the evidence tell us needs to be done based on what policies have worked in the past. The first thing that is very clear is that the titling of the indigenous territories is fundamental and that it works. That it gets concrete reductions in deforestation and that's proven by multiple studies. And while there's already a large percentage of the indigenous territories that do have titles, there's still a significant area, particularly in some of the countries, that remains to be titled. And we know in terms of territorial rights, based on the evidence, that titling enough is not alone, that governments have to respect their constitutional and legal obligations and international obligations to free, prior, and informed consent when it comes to mining, when it comes to oil, when it comes to logging, that's a key piece of this. And in those areas where there is degradation and deforestation in indigenous territories, we find that it's often because the government has given a mining concession or an oil concession or a forestry concession on top of a titled indigenous territory. The evidence shows that the government needs to enforce the title and take serious steps to help to make sure that these rights are respected. And the evidence shows that the indigenous organizations themselves need the resources and the international support to monitor their areas, patrol their areas, and go to court and demand that their territories be respected. The evidence shows that protected areas can help to keep deforestation rates lower, and this overlapping area that we heard about from Carmen and Marlene between indigenous territories and protected areas is very important, but that those protected areas work the best when they have a high level of co-management and respect for the indigenous autonomy and authority of the traditional leaders. A second area that we've heard in additional to territorial rights, based on the evidence that's very important that we found in our studies, is the need to pay communities to compensate for their environmental services, pay the indigenous communities for that. And that's not a question like it is for paying a large landowner to compensate them because they are deciding to keep their land in a forest rather than turn it into a pasture. It's providing the communities with the resources they need to be able to defend their forest, to be able to consolidate their own organization, to be able to really withstand these increasing pressures. There are good examples in the Amazon basin already. The evidence shows again that the results in Ecuador with the Socio-Bosque program have been positive in the indigenous territories in terms of reduced deforestation. There's some positive results in Peru with the Programa Peruano de Bosques, Programa Nacional de Bosques de Peru, and there's some positive results in Acre in Brazil. Much, much more funding needs to go directly to support the indigenous communities, the indigenous organizations, to compensate them, to allow them to protect these territories. And finally, the evidence shows the traditional knowledge and the cultural identity are a key piece of this, and that policies and international support need to support that. Indigenous communities that have maintained their traditional knowledge and maintained their cultural identities better intact show demonstrably better results in terms of forest management and conservation. And that sort of support includes support so that they can continue to inform each other about this, but also to recognize the status for that this sort of knowledge must have on the behalf, on not just other types of knowledge, and to reward it materially. That requires changes in educational policies. It requires changes in development policies, and it requires changes in the international recognition and the national recognition of the huge value of these cultures and knowledge. And very, very importantly, it requires an emphasis on women and youth, who are historically both the center of moving that knowledge to the next generation and the recipients of that knowledge in the next generation. All of this requires greater international support for the indigenous organizations, as well as for the governments to carry out these policies. FAO doesn't have a position for better or worse on 80%, but it is very clear that the future of the indigenous territories depends on the intact nature of the Amazon basin as a whole. And that's not just about 27%, that's about keeping the ecosystem as an ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thanks for presenting part of the main conclusions of the FAO-FINAC report, which was released late this year. I think that gives our audience a picture with the wholeness of what's not just the problems, but also the path that can be achieved and the challenges that path or those paths can have. We still have 10 minutes, and I'd like to thank David for all this great information. And I'd like to invite Martin von Hindenburg to present some of his experiences in 45 years working in the jungle. Go ahead, Martin.
Muy amables. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Gregorio, por invitarme a participar en este panel tan importante. Muchas gracias a Carlos, a Carmen, a Marlene y a David. Yo quiero decir.
Thank you, Marlene and David. We would like to complement the information. And I'm inspired by what my colleague said. They did excellent work. I'd like to complement with some information, some ideas of how I see the steps that we have to continue taking. This is like a roller coaster, and it's not a constant straight line, but it's actually a seesaw. The recognition of the indigenous territories is not enough. We should recognize the conservation areas. There is a recognition, but it's a struggle in which we do not always have a result. We are in favor of the environment, and I believe that when we are talking about a percentage of conservation, it is important to preserve what is left of the Amazon, because we have almost 17%, 20% that has forests still. We have to stop the deforestation of the forests. This is the most concrete that we can get to. I would say that the priority that worries me the most is that we should have the participation of governments. They have to get into and to make efficient laws and strategies that are more efficient regarding the protection of the forests. We should have agreements between the governments, among the governments. The other countries in the Amazon have more power since the Leticia agreement. It is a slow one, but it's actually a good step in a good direction. It is important to accompany and to avoid things from happening like we are having in Brazil, in which we have a problem in Brazil, in which the institutions are being controlled. There isn't a dedication to create these legal systems, and we also did not have an efficient law process. We have many illegal initiatives in mining, in trafficking, or in groups which are embracing taking possession of the land. And this is a function of the government, but they cannot do this because they couldn't face these problems. There is the technology and the capacity worldwide, but if there is insecurity, the people, the NGOs, the leaders of these territories suffer with the threats of violence. We have seen how many NGOs have suffered interventions, how many people were killed, and this is another fundamental problem, the agreement between governments and security. While Carlos talked about this, which is an economic alternative, not only a bioeconomy, like something that comes from biodiversity, but we should have other economical alternatives, something that comes from extractivism, for example. We have to focus on clean production. We have to promote this green economy, and it's possible to do it. We have technology, we have international resources for it, and we could do this, generating employment. I don't want to say that the local community does not become part of it. On the other hand, on the contrary, they should participate of whatever economy it is. And it's important for the cities because the decisions are not made in the forest. They are made in the cities. It's necessary for us to have an integration between urban areas and the forest, And we should create areas that can be regenerated to strengthen the local economy so that we can have a better inclusion. This was said by David as well. It includes urban areas and areas where we have education. In the Amazon, there is little study on the importance of education, of how the system works in the Amazon, and the importance of having a social organization and political organization in the territories. Every education is fundamental because we continue to have people with a more extractivist point of view and of individualized accumulation, and not a more solidary economy that allows a more joint work, for example. This implies in a change of paradigm. I believe that this is another fundamental point. And that is on the basis of everything. We have to change paradigm. Especially, this has been emphasized since the Industrial Revolution. We see nature as a collection of objects to be exploited according to our needs and to strengthen our richness. And this has led to the deterioration of the planet and the situation. This has led to the situation where we are today, where we have a planet and a half based on the consumption society and increase in production. We know that this leads to failure. We see nature as an object. So I guess to change paradigm is fundamental, so we can see nature as a communion of subjects. It is a great community to which we belong. We have to see the possibility that this nature and its well-being, and we are part of this well-being. We're not going to find well-being if we don't think things in conjunction. There is only one health, the health of nature and health of human beings. This led us to pandemics, to the destruction of the environment. And it was the lack of contact with nature that generated problems of health, for example, and coronavirus. So this is some urgent thing that we have to approach, and we have to change paradigm and to understand we are part of a greater community. We are a manifestation of the evolution, galactical and cultural revolution. It is the expression of the universe of which we are part. Even if we have technical changes, for example, clean energies, agricultural forests, bioeconomy, all of this is important. Transportation, everything is important, but there is an ethical problem on the basis. Who are we? What is our relation with the environment? What is our role and responsibility? What is our commitment and what do we have to do? This is another fundamental point. So this leads me to a very important point that complements what David was talking about. So, which is the indigenous population and the management of the environment. What we're saying is that the indigenous areas are more conserved than, for example, protected areas or national parks. So we question ourselves, why? David was saying, because of their culture and their vision of cosmos. The same way, the indigenous people, we see the lack of determination, and we could have this way 26 million hectares.
Hello, am I, Martin, te perdimos? Okay.
We lost you, Martin. We lost Martin. We're almost finishing our time. And so, Martin, know if you could come back. Yes, I'm here. Okay, Martin,
Un momento, es que
we're out of time.
pena, pero
No te
I'm back.
preocupes.
Don't worry. Can I carry on? Yeah, we are just about to finish our time, and I'd like to thank you for your support, all the inputs.
¿no me puedes dar 2 minutos para terminar?
Just 2 minutes to finish up? 1 minute, please. Thank you.
Simplemente lo que quería decir
Simply, what I would like to share with you that is very important about what we are talking about, the environment
que entiende
as a systemic unit.
que a través de sus dietas, su manejo,
And from this management, the preservation, we are going to really share knowledge. It is an intimacy knowledge where you have a deep touch with nature, how you can keep our energy in alliance with nature. This is crucial. And this is the community nature being identified in us and vice versa. When you know the right of nature, we can get this knowledge, and the indigenous people know that is the future knowledge that you should learn from, and you should have this deeper relationship. The nature as the right of being, like the indigenous people do, and treat nature. So they are not people, old-fashioned people in terms of mindset. On the contrary, they are the mindset of the future, people that think equally, and you can go together, build up the future of the planet. Thank you very much. An excellent statement to conclude. The indigenous mindset is the future, it's not the past, it's the future. And I would like to share, Carlos Nobre, yeah, you are here in this panel, and you have many years of working with other community members. And this is the point of no return, the tipping point. This is thinking that you have to have in mind. You have many studies in international, local levels to understand the phenomena, not only about the climate change, but the threats, not only in the indigenous territories, but in other areas in Amazonia. Today, we could share with David that has a tremendous experience about the role and the analysis of the role of the indigenous people in the conservation, preservation of the ecosystems, and not only in Latin America, but in other areas of the globe. And I am very honored to be the facilitator of this webinar today. Thank you, Martin, to have this agreement, this alliance with the indigenous people. They do have in their hands the solutions of our future. And then I think you could finish a webinar, so you should really lead this initiative, Carlos, Carmen, Martin, David, and then you can really change the world. Thank you for being together with us today. Thank you for all the support people and the audience that stayed with us in these 90 minutes. Thank you. Thank you for this time. See you soon.
Gracias.